Hello, everyone. Tom Hall here, Executive Director, Montclair Film, the Montclair Film Festival. Thank you for sticking around after this terrific screening of Test Pattern. For our Q&A, we have a really wonderful group from the film here to talk with us today, and I want to introduce them all individually. So to begin with, let's meet the director and writer of the film, Shatara Michelle Ford.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Brittany S. Hall.
Hi.
Gail Bean.
Hello.
And Amani Starnes.
Hi.
Thank you all for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. We're so grateful to have the film in the festival and to have you all here with us. Shatara, I want to start with you. So every piece of art begins with an intention. And this film in particular has so much complexity and so much going on, but it's told in such a simple and elegant way. I wanted to ask you about the writing process because, every fiction film really begins on the page. When you began this project and when you sat down to write it, how much of what ended up being in the film was essentially the intention that you put forward in writing the script?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First off, what I'm really interested in as a filmmaker is examining systems, particularly systems of oppression. And I think the best way to do that is by, watching people navigate those systems. And I really enjoy it being a microcosm for, the world that we live in. I don't know. So the simpler the story for me, the better, because I think that the whole point is these systems of oppression, these power struggles that we're having exist in every fraction of life. So we don't really need to make it that big. And I think sometimes making it super big takes away from the gravity and reality of what we're living in. So I was really interested in this film of exploring how our systems fail Black women in America. And I wanted to look at that from, a racial standpoint, a gender standpoint, a political structural standpoint. So to me, the idea was, how do I explore a relationship that already has a very extreme power dynamic, whether that be on the lines of class or gender or race, or even location. And then I wanted to add the extra layer of something that we are dealing with all the time, which is, access to justice when things go wrong, and kind of a larger conversation about women's reproductive care and needs and resources. So that's where all that came from. It was a 34-page script. I was really influenced by Mike Lee. And I think that if I had the money and resources, I would have really loved to come in with an idea of point A to point B, what I was trying to achieve in the story, and then come together with a whole bunch of actors and kind of create these characters together and spend a lot of time exploring that and filling that in. Obviously, this is an indie film, which I funded a lot with my own debt. And also, my lovely crew of actors and folks had other jobs and other things, so we weren't really able to commit to that idea. But what the 34-page script kind of functioned as was a blueprint as such for each scene. So for me, the thought was, again, the actors knew where I wanted them to start and where I wanted them to end up. And then there was a lot of space to get there. So again, not full pure improv by any means, but the idea is that we've been creating these characters together. We kind of know what they're supposed to be doing. So I don't really care how they get there. So yeah, I think that everything was kind of up for debate. What I put on the page was a suggestion for the most part, as long as they got from A to B. And I think what we focused on more was authenticity, I really liked the thought of, and for me in general as a director, I want to be the bullshit detector. I want to create these characters with my actors. I want to know them as well as they do, but at a certain point, they're going to know them better than me. And it's just my job to kind of stand back and say, okay, I don't believe it. You know what I mean? And so, or I do, and we can move on. So that was kind of the idea for that very tiny script that I wrote that ended up being, 82 minutes.
That's that is a really terrific comparison in terms of process, which is, Mike Lee's process of doing all those rehearsals, but also giving, maybe we don't have that opportunity in this situation because of money and time, which is so often a challenge for independent filmmakers, but that sort of kitchen sink realism that comes out of authentic storytelling and collaboration. I'm wondering for the actors, for Brittany, Gail, and Amani, that approach is not necessarily the social realist approach with giving you guys room to build character that way is not a common approach in the film world, and its uncommonality gives it that authenticity. What was that like for you guys to work with Shatara and build those characters that way and do it on camera? Were you liberated? Were you terrified? Were you excited to collaborate? Maybe we can start with you, Brittany, and then Gail and Amani can follow.
I feel like you said the perfect word, liberated. That's how I felt. It was very, I love like co-creating in that way. Shatara worked very closely with me to get into Renisha's head. And she made me feel very comfortable. Like if there was any kind of confusion that I had with like Renisha or her thoughts or her choices, she was always able to like really break it down, the perspective, to a point where it was simplified and I could understand and say, thank you, And what I really loved more so was when we finally got on set, as soon as she said action, she really gave us the time to like kind of like float into the scene naturally instead of just expecting us to like go right as at action. Like I remember there was this one moment, the scene after I get out the tub and I walk into the room with the head wrap. I literally had to like walk throughout the house to like find the space of getting into that emotion. And I was just grateful because Shatara gives us that space to like fall into the character. So it's very, very liberating because it didn't feel like any pressure. It just felt like everyone was really working together to get this story told and like co-collaborating on discovering the character and the choices and the dynamics, and like even working with Gail and Amani, like just the energy that they brought into the room or into the scene. It was so easy for me to feed off of. I loved it.
And Gail, how about for you?
I agree with everything Brittany said in regards to it being liberating. And Shatara is an actor's director. It's one of you have a director and an actor's director. She is an actor's director, someone who you love to create with because it'll be a collaborative effort and they won't put you in a box. She will allow you to explore the character, explore her words on the page, explore the information that she gives you and take it and let it be your own and breathe. And then she's there to give you guidance where it's like, okay, I see what you've done with it, but now from the outside looking in, let me help you elevate it to another level. And it's refreshing when you work with someone like that who really knows their craft, who's really passionate about the story they're telling in the project and what they do. And Shatara has a very beautiful eye when it comes to a script and storytelling. So it was just one of those things. I feel like everybody should work with someone like her at least 3 times a year.
That made me cry.
That's lovely. Amani, how about for you? What was that experience like?
I'd worked with Shatara before, and she's consistently excellent. And I think, I don't want to repeat what Gail and Brittany said, and just another thing that I think is so valuable is she almost approaches a set like you would a play stage. So when it comes to creating an environment that is both experimental and controlled, she does a really amazing job. So it wasn't just the actors who were cared for, especially in a setting and with a story that was so sensitive in the subject matter. Everyone on set was of the same mind. They were in the same world. And then she trusts us, she's like, I've given you this sacred space. do you. And I think for a lot of us, a lot of times it's stand here, do this, say this. The script supervisor was just like, okay. So.
Yeah, that definitely created problems.
What?
Sorry, that definitely created problems, I think, especially, when, I don't know, I think there's always like a balance to strike because, I think trust is the most important thing, right? And like, when y'all were cast, when I hired you, that was the point. I trusted you. I knew you could do it. And then I wouldn't have even let you walk on that set if I didn't think I was going to believe anything that you're going to put out there. So it's really nice. However, it does create chaos for other people who look at a script and they expect one thing to happen and like something from all the way over there. So yeah, I was also very grateful to my script supervisor for kind of going with the flow on that. But yeah.
Shatara, you built equity and inclusion into the overall production as a conscious act of, I think, not just political, but opportunity building and doing what I think is a role model's job of creating a set. How much did that contribute to the environment of trust on set with everyone? You had a very inclusive crew. You have a very inclusive cast in terms of gender, in terms of LGBTQ status, in terms of race. I just think that's brilliant. And I'm wondering if that created a culture on set that you found to be more supportive to the story that you were telling.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that unfortunately, even if it was a very intentional thing, but I think what's very true about filmmaking, especially independent filmmaking, is that people end up just working with the folks that they trust. The folks that they trust end up being people who look like them or operate in their circles or spend, or have the same kind of interests. And I think when that world is dominated by straight, cis white men, that can be a problem. And I think in this particular thing, again, like I said, it was intentional, but I think even if it weren't, the set probably would have ended up looking the same. So I think already because we, it was like just in this call right now, right? We've got 3, Black women, like there's a reason for that. And I think we feel immediately comfortable with each other and have an understanding with each other that isn't necessarily there in your typical case. But I think beyond that, one thing for me that was important on a political level was to give people jobs that I knew that they could do, but systemically they've been put through the ringer and come out the other end not getting because of like inherent kind of like setups that keep someone from doing that. So I mean, like Gail, Brittany, and Amani all should be working more than they are. And they should all have these most like wonderful, like brilliant, like nuanced characters. I honestly I feel very, very grateful to have been able to work with them. The same with like all of my heads of department. They should all be heading up their departments all of the time, but they're not. And that's for very structural reasons. And so I think that there's this kind of complicated like thing, I know that they can do it. They know they can do it, but then we get on set and we fall into these defaults. And so I think there's always this moment before we start work when all of us, even me, because I'm in the same place, I gave myself the job, but I doubted myself. And I think we all have those small, I can't speak for everyone, but at least what I assume, what I witness is I think we all have that moment where we doubt ourselves because we're not used to being given that trust. I don't know, maybe someone else can speak to that, but at least that's how I feel. So.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I always say I'm so grateful for you, Shatara, because you gave me the biggest yes for me. And I was just like, thank you. And, I mean, since the first moment we met, I just been grateful to sit down and have a conversation with you, because when we talked about this movie and then we talked about my history, I've never really talked about it with anyone. So sitting and talking to you, I felt like that was the initial form of trust between us, is opening up with our truths. So, yeah.
I love that. That's great. So Brittany and Shatara, while I have both of you,
I'm so
Renee.
sorry. Can I just say one
Oh,
thing?
yes, of course, Gail, sorry.
I just want to say thank you to Shatara for the environment you created. I didn't know whether it was or wasn't strategic. I just thought it organically happened. And that was the first set. Well, not the first. Well, basically the first set that I ever didn't feel like a minority on the set. And it was so diverse. So it wasn't like it was all Black. It was so many different people from race to sexuality, religion, gender. But I didn't feel like a minority. Like I just felt like we were all there, all as artists, all with great energy and positive vibes. And that is an experience that you can talk to any actor and they will let you know is so rare. So thank you for that safe space. Because I think it allowed us to be our freest and create something so beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Yeah, that's, I mean, what I was saying as a role model in terms of inclusion, I think that's exactly the point you just made, both of you, is what I was trying to get at there. So I'm glad to see that thought carries through. I want to talk a little bit about the character of Renisha and sort of the national conversation that we're having right now about Black women carrying responsibility for change. One of the things that I found particularly moving about this film and about Renisha's character in general is that she is a survivor of a crime and yet is being made to be responsible for her partner, for her friend in the scene where they're in the bar. She has this tremendous sense of responsibility towards others. And thinking about the creative process as well, and as a director and a writer and being responsible for a set, obviously not the same thing, but it sort of is a similar situation in terms of being a creative person. Shatara, I'm wondering if you could talk about her character in that way, in the context of the way in which Black women are asked to carry the burdens of others. And Brittany, if that thought may have informed your portrayal.
What a question. Yeah, I don't know. It's a kind of a no-brainer, right? I think the difference here is, again, I can only speak for myself, but I think this is a truth that is universal, at least for Black women in America. I think we know this, and I think we feel this, and we experience this, but it's not something that we feel okay with admitting out loud. And I think the second that I admitted that to myself in 2016 and then committed to being honest about that in my work, in my life, the script was always going to be what it was. But like the hurdle was the admission and the commitment to being vocal about that in any space, double consciousness or not. So there's that. And I would say, I mean, you mentioned, my experience writing and directing and producing, pretty much self-financing the film, isn't that, but it is that. It's that because it's that always in every space, right? We're always doing that. And so it made it especially hard to do my job because truly all I really should have been doing is, directing, working with the actors, making sure that my heads of department are doing what they're supposed to do to get the best on the day. But I was also making sure that I could pay the bills and making sure that, the crew were being looked after and making sure that none of them knew about that, because if they did, it would make their jobs really hard. So that was more of a burden for me. And it made, I don't know, I mean, like, I am grateful for, I'm glad that I did it, but I'm also recognizing the extra labor that I had to put in to like do that job well and to make this thing happen. And I don't think that it should be like that for anyone, but especially Black women. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is that relates to Renisha is that, again, if this is just a normal way of being, or just being truthful about it, all I was doing is just shifting the point of view to make sure that that was a part of the narrative at every point. yeah, I don't know, Brittany, how do you feel about that?
Well, I remember us talking about this, and I feel like I remember Shatara, you mentioning, like, especially with the scenes with Gail, how Renisha just is trying to be a good friend. And so even though she did have this weighted responsibility, in her world, she didn't see it as like her responsibility. It was just kind of like, well, I just want to be a good friend. I just want to be a good person. I just want to, do these things. And it doesn't feel like a responsibility. And I also feel as though that's kind of how it is in just normal life. We don't feel the weight of it, even though we're carrying it. And so I always had to keep that kind of in the back of my mind, because I didn't want to show her weight too soon, if that makes sense. I just wanted it to come off like, oh, well, she just wants to live life and try to be responsible and be a supportive friend and be a good girlfriend and make sure the dogs get out. And you know what I mean? Where it is a part of her everyday life, even though it is heavy. And so it was like a balancing act with that, because you know that, but you don't want to like show it too deeply. You want it to play like the simplicity of how it is for Black women, where we just want to get through our day the best that we can.
But I do think that's our existence. Sorry. I thought you were
yeah.
Just maybe think about it. I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew that you made that choice to kind of like hold the weight but not reveal it too soon, because I think that's, again, at least how I observe and understand this experience to be. I don't think we even know the weight is there. Yeah. We just feel the consequences of it, right? And like we're watching Renisha get dragged around by a whole bunch of other people's wishes and wills, and she's losing every single time. And I don't think she really took stock of the weight that she was holding until the absolute end. And at that point, she's a shell of a person. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And, Shatara, you gave Renisha a white partner in this film. And I have to admit that I came to this movie blind, not knowing anything about it. And I immediately had a sense of dread when they got together, because not because of the film, I don't think it necessarily felt like a psychological thriller, but there's a tension from the get-go in their relationship that I think is built upon this desire for Renisha to please her partner. That could be whether or not he's a white man or not. I think that's possible, but that certainly adds a layer to it. And to take that character out into the world with her after, the trauma of surviving sexual assault, and have, it could have been like a white dude who's like, what? The system's broken. And it has a little bit of that element to it, but her point of view of, what do we expect from the system? I think that's another thing that's happening in the political conversation right now, is that suddenly people are waking up to a long-standing political and racial understanding of the world that's existed, since the founding of the country. And suddenly now people are aware of it. And I think the film does a very clever job of framing that character and his sort of awakening as this sort of white entitlement and frustration that Renisha doesn't necessarily share in. And that creates even further tension. Can you talk about building that character and making the choice to put a white partner with Renisha in the film?
Yeah. It was always going to be a white person. Again, like I said, I'm interested in systems, right? Systems of oppression. So if we think about the building blocks of America as we know it, it's white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And patriarchy and white supremacy feed capitalism. It creates this thing, it sustains this thing, right? So, and within this kind of system of domination, the most vulnerable always lose out, and the most vulnerable within America are always effectively Black women and femmes, Indigenous folks, primarily. And so the idea with that is, how do I distill that in a relationship? And I think also when I was just kind of reflecting on all of these stories that I was hearing about women who couldn't get rape kits, or women who never even considered getting rape kits until they had fully embraced or accepted or processed their own assaults. And by that point, a rape kit isn't useful anymore because you have such a small window of time where the forensic evidence is, purposeful. I was thinking to myself, well, if I was in this situation and I knew rape kits existed, I'm not fully sure that I'd ever go through those great lengths of reporting it because I don't trust the system. I grew up in Missouri. So, that's kind of, I think we are all really familiar with like the ways in which Missouri has approached policing Black life and reproductive justice through their aggressive pushing out of Planned Parenthood. So in a state like that, for me, if I were there and something like that happened, I wouldn't trust the system. I wouldn't trust the police. I wouldn't do anything. And so I kept asking myself, well, if a Black woman in a hostile state, and I would argue Texas is a hostile state for a Black woman, if something like this were to happen, would she automatically think to report to the police? Would she think to, get help from the system? Probably not. Who would motivate her to do that? Probably someone who trusts it. So that's why Evan existed in the way that he did, to kind of like push that conversation. I'm also really interested in interracial relationships. I'm in one, so I think about it a lot. And I'm interested in the concepts of white allyship. Like, what does it look like to be a white person who is allies, is friends, surrounds themselves with Black people, but still fails to do their job effectively of making their space, their society more equitable? What does it look like to be a white person who does not center Blackness? What does it look like to be a white person that does not evaluate their own power and their own privilege in a dynamic and work to kind of decenter that? And I think, again, that makes Evan the most incredible foil and antagonist in what is a very sweet relationship. I also find it, especially, at the time when I wrote it, but even now in 2020, like I'm very concerned about the state of white people who align themselves with Black people and do not have those honest conversations. And so, even when you have the most liberal white person, the most, open-minded, cis hetero white man at your side, if they're not doing the work, they're hurting you. So again, that was my idea with Evan, like, how does someone so sweet and so genuine still end up, creating great damage and harm?
Yeah, and there's also a critique. We touched on it earlier when we were talking about it, but maybe Brittany and Gail could talk about the friendship between Renisha and Amber in the film. This sort of ends up being again, the men being white in that situation, but being sort of, trapped in this club and unable to sort of support one another in the moment and be aware of each other as friends. Can you guys talk about building that sequence together as actors and how you sort of develop that tension and dread in that moment that ends up, really defining the film in a lot of ways?
Well, I first met Gail on set, and it was just like instant energy connection with us. And so it was very, very easy and very, very natural for us to have that connection and friendship on screen. And where I had to get more of an understanding and a perspective, and once again, Shatara helped me with this, was like seeing because I watched the film around a lot of people, and initially some people's reaction is they don't understand why Renisha isn't mad at her friend. And I also wanted to get help with that perspective too. And I think it does help to understand that like Gail's character, she was stressed, she was out, she wanted to have a good time, but she wasn't being malicious and trying to put herself and put herself or her friend in danger. In fact, she also was a victim, herself. The guy left her in the parking lot, and if it wasn't for Evan coming and finding her, who knows what would have happened to her. So I think it is important that towards the end of the movie, there is no fuss and fight between them. It's just like, here, do you want a piece of gum? I'm here for you. Here's your clothes. I love you. Because they both went through something traumatic. Even though they had their own separate experiences, they both went through something traumatic. But it was really, really easy to act out a friendship with Gail. Like, I love Gail. Gail is so easy.
Gail, how did you approach your character's sort of, not responsibility, but sort of survivorship in this situation?
What my character, it wasn't I was already aware that it wasn't a setup, so it wasn't intentional. I didn't try to set Renisha's character up to, like she said, to cause harm for either of us. It was unexpected. It came out of left field. But originally I didn't know like all that happened with her. So when I did get to the house and I was asking like, is she okay? And trying to figure out like what happened. I don't think my character, and I talked with Shatara about this, my character didn't initially know the extent of how bad Renisha's night went. So she wasn't aware. And then when I did find out, I was more so worried and scared for my friend than, and that happens, especially a lot in the Black community, to where you get to the point of scared and you just want to make sure that this person is okay, instead of going straight to like anger or to blame or to something that's not productive in the moment. So I think with my character, yes, I felt some type of responsibility of, I feel bad for her, but it wasn't, I shouldn't have put us in this moment. I had us there, because at the end of the day, we had the right to go out and party. So it's the responsibility and the fault isn't mine, because this was our body, this was our choice. They shouldn't have drugged us, and they shouldn't have felt that they had any entitlement and any right to imputing on our night and our time and on our body. So I think Shatara made sure that the characters were strong and they knew who they were, and it was very reflective of plenty of Black women who unfortunately find themselves in such a situation. It's not that we set ourselves up, and it's not that it was any malicious intent. It's 9 times out of 10, someone feeling that they have a claim or a right to what is ours. So why should we possess the guilt and take on the guilt and feel responsible and shunned for just simply being in the wrong place?
Yeah, and that leads me, Shatara and Amani, but Shatara first, to the question of sexual assault as sort of the framework for this systemic distrust that I think you talked about earlier. And it's an absolute epidemic in this country, or probably globally, I could say, sexual assault against women. And as women of color bear a huge burden in those numbers, and outsized number of women of color have been victimized and survived sexual assault. I'm wondering if you could talk about using sexual assault as a framework for examining the healthcare system, examining sort of this relationship to trust in law enforcement, and trust in self. And then Amani, perhaps after Shatara answers that, we could talk a little bit about sort of bringing a more compassionate approach as an actor to that situation. But maybe Shatara first as an intention.
Real quick, sorry, Shatara, before you answer, I have to go.
Oh.
Is there anything you wanted me to say before I leave?
Brittany, no, that's fine. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us.
Appreciate it. It was great seeing Gail, Amani, Shatara, and thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you. So yeah, Shatara, sorry, I was asking about sexual assault as a framework for distrust, systemic distrust, and sort of a really great focal point to bring all of these aspects of the system to bear on the story.
Yeah, well, at the top of this, I have to say again that, any structure that does not center their most vulnerable are always going to fail them, right? And so, I mean, the fact that we're talking about, sexual health, reproductive justice, and the folks who make these decisions most of the time are not women or not femmes, means that we're going to be stuck in this, right? So that's the first thing to say. I think, again, at the time that I was writing this, I was reflecting a lot on how Black people, Black women, Black femmes are failed, right? And so also this was right before we really had a larger nationwide conversation about consent, about the extensive assault, about rape, and how power plays into that, just simply by reflecting on like the Harvey Weinstein case. So all of this stuff was on my mind, and it didn't make sense to not talk about it. And again, I think you could speak to most women and femmes, and like with the patriarchal society that we live in, with the lack of education around consent, and the lack of, I think, accountability for rape culture, for the way in which we indoctrinate men and boys to participate in such a, oppressive culture, means that we've all probably run into, in the great spectrum of assault, something, right? And even on set, all of us had a story. And just by doing the work, things that we had not really thought about before came up. Things that we hadn't even considered before in the light, with time that had passed, within the context of like how we're pushing and really trying to define consent for what it actually is. We realized, I've been violated. This has happened to me. This has happened to me. So that was constantly happening on set. So again, it made sense just for where I was at and what I was processing and reflecting on, where we were as a society, that I was going to have this kind of situation. There's just so much at stake. There's so much at stake, and then also nothing, right? Because within the larger dominant culture, the fact that we're still having a conversation about believing people when they say something happened to them, the fact that we're still struggling to get people the things that they need to protect themselves, and create a good, healthy space for themselves sexually. Again, it only meant that this is the thing that made sense to do. So.
And Amani, you sort of, in the film represent sort of the face of this in a lot of ways, or, your character is a part of that system. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to your character in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'm super intellectual, and I did a bunch of research about forensic nursing and the statistics of how rape kits are processed in Texas, and that component really helped and sort of ground me in a world. But similar to what Shatara said, the way I approached it was not that difficult, because I just tried to imagine the person that I would need in that situation, and that a lot of my friends have needed in that situation that just didn't exist. So, it's just drawing on life experience. And with acting, it's a fine line you walk between how much you imagine and how much you really pull from traumatizing wells that exist. And I just needed to be someone's angel, and there's this sort of double-edged sword of being a woman of color, where you're expected to have this like bottomless capacity for compassion and care. But so infrequently are you given the space to extend that to people who look like you, who are going through the same thing as you. So I just wanted to be someone's relief, no questions asked. I can't tell you how many times I've had to justify anything. When I go to the doctor, I tell them my education level immediately, and I tell them that my dad is a surgeon, because that's the only way people believe me. So that was my approach. And Brittany and Shatara made it really, really easy. And it was a really important experience for me.
I think the film is just such a great, compassionate story. It ends on like you said earlier, Shatara, on a note of heartbreak in a lot of ways, but unnecessary heartbreak. I'm wondering if you, for a final question, if you could just let us know what's happening with the film now, where folks can tell their friends to see it after the festival, and how we can stay involved in the life of this film.
Yeah. First of all, thank you. It is going to be out, I think, in select theaters, or however in this pandemic time we decide is best and safest, through Kino Lorber. So I don't know, keep your eyes peeled on social media channels for Kino Lorber, and Test Pattern has an Instagram, so you can check there too. So yeah, at some point in 2021, we'll see it, hopefully safely and appropriately. Yeah.
And do you have another project that you're working on now?
I've got tons, but I mean, that's a funny question, right? Because we still are in a place where Hollywood doesn't fund Black women or give Black women things. So, I have things that I want to do that I would like support on, that I'd like to have greenlit, but we'll see.
Well, Break Legs, we have a lot of faith and belief in your storytelling power. I think you're a really tremendous artist. I love this film. We're so grateful to you, to Brittany, Gail, and Amani for being here with us. Thank you guys so much. Break a leg with the release, and we look forward to your success.